You guys have been screaming at me to cover Radiant Black, so let's cover Radiant Black. So this initially opens up with Daniel Burnett, and this poor guy, man, he can't win for losing. So this guy is basically a Uber driver by all standards of measurement. And what this does is it initially picks up with the fact that he's got $38,000 in credit card debt. And I don't even know how somebody does that. He's got 47 bucks roughly in his bank account, and he's trying to take out a loan. Now, it doesn't take a genius to figure out the fact that this guy's not getting any money from anybody, but he's stuck on pretty hard times because as a writer, he doesn't really have any money coming in. And so this ultimately leads to him having to move back in with his parents at Lockport, Illinois. Now, of course, his mom is how almost every mom is. She's just excited to see baby Bird back home. His dad is a little more hard and a little more difficult about this. And in fact, the relationship I wouldn't really say is strained, but I would say that it's a little rough around the edges. And so at that point, he's met by a buddy of his, Marshall, who's actually his best friend. And so, of course, seeing Nathan back home, he's happy to see him and ends up, taking him out to a bar to find out that he's $38,000 in debt. And he's like, dude, that is an insane amount of credit card debt. How does that happen? Did you just buy a car and forget about it? Right? It's just one of these things where his friend's kind of busting his balls. The other part of this is that Nathan's parents don't know about his financial situation. The first reason he hasn't told them is because they don't really have that kind of money. And so to tell them that he's in that level of debt and for them to be unable to help him in that way is going to make them feel some kind of way, probably a little bit guilty, at least his mom. His dad, being somewhat of a dick and kind of a tightwad when it comes to cash, is probably going to give him a hard time about it. So for him, it's easier to just kind of let it all go. But suddenly, as the two of them are basically leaving this bar, Nathan ends up seeing out in maybe a few feet away a black hole just sitting in the air. Now, how it is that this singularity hasn't just sucked in everything around it and brought an end to creation as you and I know it, I have no clue. But the fact is, it's there. And so he does what any logical human being would do in that kind of situation. He reaches out and touches it. And he is immediately met with powers. And this is when the story gets amazing. Because I got to tell you guys, man, Radiant Black, it kind of feels like the new Invincible, if I'm being honest with you guys. Because once this happens, he immediately dons this amazing looking costume. And I got to say, man, it's one of the best looking costumes in all of comic books. And because of this incredibly quick metamorphosis, he doesn't quite know how to handle it and starts puking his guts up. Now, Kyle Higgins, when he writes this story, it's done incredibly well because in reality, that's kind of how most people would react. I mean, we like to believe that if we were suddenly met by superpowers, that we would just be like, yeah, I'm going to be a villain and just go start doing villainous stuff. I know I would. But in reality here, we wouldn't really know how to process the situation. We wouldn't necessarily know how to handle it. And so what happens is a couple of cops, right, Officer Mills and Officer Peters, show up here just because of the fact that it seems like they're trespassing. And you have Marshall who kind of runs his mouth a little bit, but then a train comes out of nowhere, right? Because there's kind of a little bit of a joke there where it's look, you guys need to get off the tracks. There's a train coming. And literally Marshall, just being this guy who wants to stand up to the cops, is well, get out of our way and we'll get off the tracks, right? He's just kind of defiant to the cops. But then a train is actually coming. And in that moment, Nathan's powers activate. He levitates everybody, including the train, into the air, which of course saves pretty much everyone's life. The funny thing about this is that the cops don't initially know how to handle this. They're just kind of okay, so how do we report this? A glowing blue man in a crazy black suit levitated a train and us and our vehicles and saved our lives. To a degree, it's kind of easier to just sweep it under the rug. So this leads to Nathan basically grabbing Marshall and the two of them flying off, and then the cops being safely landed, back where they were before. Now, at that moment, you do get a little bit of an explanation on how the powers work. Nathan is constantly figuring this out. It is one of the cool things. There is really no one-shot comic where it's and now a Rocky montage and they play Hearts on Fire while he learns how his powers work. Instead, it's him just kind of getting these small moments here and there. And in this instance, one of the things that Marshall says is, okay, so when the train was coming toward us, you just thought about lifting the train and then you lifted the train and everything else around it. So try that, right? I mean, one thing, you just got to breathe or you're going to bust a gut. And number two, just think about removing the helmet and see what happens. He thinks about it, and the helmet goes away. So now he's back to his regular self. So of course that tells us that the suit responds to his mental commands. Now there is also a moment here where Nathan lashes out at Marshall over the idea that he doesn't need anybody's help, that he doesn't really need anybody around him. It isn't one of these things where like the suit is influencing him in a negative way or anything like that. At least that does not initially seem to be the case. Instead, it's just kind of the weight of the world on his shoulders, right? Because he says, the worst part about coming home isn't really the debt, and it's not feeling like I tried and failed, because that would imply that I actually did something. The worst part about all of this experience is that I had a chance to do something meaningful and I wasted it. Now, of course, he's talking about his time as a writer. And what's interesting is that this new opportunity kind of presents him a second wind. But in the moment, he says that agent that I was telling you about, which he was talking to Marshall about, an agent that was interested in hearing his book and that he was just waiting for Nathan to finish it. He's like, he's not waiting for my book. I mean, he was open to looking at it like 4 years ago, and I still don't even have the first chapter done. Maybe I wasn't ready, or I was too afraid to find out that I wasn't good enough at the one thing that I've wanted to do my entire life. I don't really know. All that really matters is that when the opportunity was there, I didn't have it. I've screwed up so many things, you have no idea. But now I have this, and whatever it is, I know it's important. I can fly and I can lift trains, and it feels amazing. The stakes just got a lot higher, and I cannot screw this up too. And that's really the thing that weighs on him, right? Like, he feels like a complete and total failure. And it's the other side of superheroing that you never really hear about, right? That whenever you see these stories about the origins of superheroes, it's, Peter Parker, who's just some high school kid and suddenly bitten by a radioactive spider. And then he makes the mistake of letting a criminal get away. And then Uncle Ben dies, and he understands that with great power must come great responsibility. The words of Uncle Ben finally harken home, and he learns his lesson. But you don't really see very many instances where you have a person who has no real confidence, where you have a person who feels like a complete and total loser who's suddenly given these incredible powers. When that happens, 9 times out of 10, it's a villain origin, not a superhero origin. So it's one of the coolest things that you get with this. And I love the human element of it, especially when Marshall comes in and he's like, look, man, like, here's the thing. The fact that you're worried about the power that you have and what you could do with it shows that you're responsible enough to use it intelligently. So you're not going to screw this up, because I'm not going to let you. And that's where he says, and who knows, right? Maybe this thing will help with the writing too. Writers are supposed to focus on what makes them unique, right? Well, as of tonight, I'd say you're pretty one of a kind, but he's not. Because there is a red version of Radiant Black, which I guess would be Radiant Red, that just knocked over a bank. And so at that point, you kind of get a little bit of a fast track here, right? For example, Nathan sits down and talks to his dad, and while his dad kind of pokes and prods at the idea that like Nathan has no real source of income, he doesn't really ask a whole lot of questions, but he kind of lays the ground rules and saying, hey, if you're going to stay here, you can be here as long as you need to be, but you need to get to work. You need to find some kind of a job and contribute something to the family. Another thing that happens here is that you end up having a couple of cops that show up to the house of Nathan, specifically Mills and Peters. Now, they're not really here to like arrest him. They're not here to interrogate him or anything along those lines. Instead, what they do is they tell him, look, based on what you've done, you have a very real opportunity to help your community in a really significant way, doing things that very few people ever actually have a chance to do. Not only that, they also inform him of, we're just going to call them Radiant Red. I don't know if that's their actual name. Technically, they're just called Red, but I like the idea of Radiant Red. I think it just sounds cool. But they inform Nathan of that, and they kind of ask the question, like, are you two working together? Now, he has no clue of who Radiant Red is, that they even exist out there, or that they're actually doing anything. But it does hit him on to the idea that someone out there has powers that are seemingly identical to his, which he doesn't really know the ins and outs, but questions can be answered, right? Finding common ground. So of course, he and Marshall come up with the genius idea of going to find this person. And there's only one real way that he knows how to do this. Drive to Chicago, be an Uber driver, and ask people about the bank robbery. It's probably the most ad hoc detective run that I think I've ever seen, but it actually turns out to be pretty effective, because where most people have no idea what he's talking about, or maybe there's just some kind of basic understanding, like somebody showed them a video or something like that, there's one guy who's just kind of like, yeah. He says, that whole thing was crazy, and I'm pretty sure I saw the guy too. First, it was just just some red streaks, like I thought I was seeing things. But then they came back, and it was all near this junkyard. And apparently, the dude just knocked over another MK branch. And like Nathan asked, did you tell the cops? And the guy's like, I mean, look, man, like I haven't really been a saint, and the police are not exactly my phone a friend, right? Guys like me try to avoid the cops. So Nathan's given a location of the junkyard. And when he shows up there, of course, he transforms into Radiant Black and immediately finds Radiant Red and just kind of starts asking questions, right? Like, is robbing banks the smartest thing to do with all of your flashy new powers? I mean, I found you. How long before the cops do? And instead of really answering any of these questions verbally, Radiant Red answers with their fists and literally just punches Radiant Black, right? Punches Nathan as hard as they possibly can and sends this dude flying. And so you do kind of get a momentary fight between the two, but it's quite clear here that like Radiant Red understands how to use their powers far more prodigiously than Nathan does. And in fact, they overcome Nathan quite readily. He gets crushed. And then of course that leads to Radiant Red just basically walking away. Now, of course, Nathan recovers pretty quickly, only to find out that Red stole his car and is now like beelining with his car as fast as they possibly can. Now, when Nathan catches up to them, they take the car and drive it off of a bridge and then jump out of the car while it's happening. So then Nathan manages to use his powers and grab the money bags. And then of course, this leads to Radiant Red essentially getting away. And then Nathan goes to save his car. And, you know, for the most part, the day seems to be saved, right? He's got a few $100,000 to his name. His car's been saved. And then he does what's probably one of the most boneheaded things that a person could do. He turns the money in. Now, let me tell you guys something, right? I joke about being a villain all the time, but if I were a superhero and $200,000 to $300,000 in cash just was there after I defeated a villain, I mean, look, man, that's the fee for me doing my job. You know what I mean? Like, it's the city paying me for my service. You know what I mean? Like, I gotta put food on the table somehow, right? That money ain't going back. But of course, with Nathan, him being a true superhero, he gives the money back. He does what you or I would not do. And don't tell me you would. Right? I know you wouldn't. But again, like once you kind of get back to this whole thing, all joking aside, right? It does kind of give him this sort of renewed vigor, right? This renewed purpose, because now he has a kind of reason for getting up in the morning, right? The biggest issue that he struggled with here was that he was just kind of a failed writer, right? That he saw himself as a failure. He had no real motivation, no desire to really do anything outside of try to get his story done. So the one thing he had to do every day was the one thing that wasn't working out. So every day felt like a failure. But now that he can operate as a superhero, he has kind of a greater sense of purpose here. The other part of that is that he has these kind of visions in his head where he sees what almost looks like a kind of digital figure out there, and they say things like radiant, right? It is a really cool concept. We'll talk more about that here in a little bit, but he ends up going to visit Marshall, right? Where Marshall's just, you know, kind of working in a video store, I'm pretty sure, like that's it. And so what Marshall's been doing, as a tried and true friend would do, is he's helping Nathan figure out a superhero name, which is amazing because he comes up with this like the Vanguard Darkness, which of course is already taken. Initially, he wanted to go with like Mighty Morphin, but of course that would lead to a massive lawsuit. So at that point, it's just kind of like, okay, like we have to figure something out. Not only this, he starts referring to Nathan as a superhero. Now, Nathan loves the idea of doing good things, but being considered a superhero seems so strange to him because in this story, they do make references to like Marvel and DC, right? Batman, characters like that. So for someone like Nathan, a superhero is a comic book character. It's Spider-Man. It's Captain America. It's not just a dude who found a black hole, decided to touch it, and suddenly got powers. But for the most part, that's true, right? Because where he starts talking to Marshall about what his name should be, he's like, I don't know, maybe like something to do with Radiant, right? And Marshall's like, oh my God, that's perfect, right? He's like, hold on, let me sit down, right? Let me think about this for a second. And he's like, okay, Radiant Black. And at that point, Nathan's like, okay, I mean, it's no Batman, right? And Marshall's like, dude, Batman wasn't Batman. A name is just an empty vessel. It's nothing until you fill it with associations. And so at that point, Nathan's like, yeah, but like my powers are blue. And the response of Marshall is kind of funny here, right? He's like, I mean, look, it's not a blue hole, it's a black hole. Black is great, classic, super sexy, always. And so the response to Nathan, well, I mean, why wouldn't it be like Black Radiant? And Marshall's like, I mean, sure, if you're a 1970s Marvel character, but come on, man, like this is so dope. He's like, plus, I already registered the social media account. And Nathan's like, what? And the first tweet that Marshall sent out was like, hey, I'm the guy who gave back the money. And it has 1 like. Somebody out there saw that tweet and decided to like it, which I think is kind of hilarious, right? Because that's like the most Twitter thing ever. And so at that point, like Nathan kind of flips out over the idea of a social media account. But the response of Marshall is, I mean, look, dude, like, is social media a plague on society? Sure. But the fact is, it is a part of the fabric of our society. You have to embrace it. Plus, man, you could go viral, and that's not going to do anything but like help your profile. So of course, Nathan basically storms out, right? He ends up walking away. And so once he's back home and has a little bit of a nightmare and hallucinates a version of Radiant Black that's seemingly himself, but just much older and seemingly far more brutal, right? He literally tells him that he's not worth breathing, that he wakes up to a tweet. And the tweet is, and now we've got a flat on 355. We could really use Radiant Black right now. Hashtag LOL. I don't know why you would laugh at your own flat tire, but Radiant Black gets there and doesn't know how to change a tire. Right? And so like once he kind of tries to figure it out, he just demonstrates the inability to do so. The family's kid basically calls him inept because it's like, what kind of superhero doesn't know how to change a flat tire? And it's like, what kind of kid doesn't know how to change a flat tire? Right? Like, I mean, if you're so smart, you have the whole of the internet at your disposal. How do you not know? And so when the family says like, we're supposed to be a tip-off and obviously we're not going to make that, Nathan does the responsible thing. He picks up the car and flies it, which is awesome because the whole family's just having the time of their life. It looks absolutely amazing. And then he gets back home at 2 a.m. and then starts working on writing again. Here's the cool thing. The entire time that he's had this writing block, he never really knew what to write. But then it all starts coming to him. The story is based around a girl named Elizabeth, but all he starts to do is write his own story as the character of Elizabeth, which seemingly gives him exactly what he needs to make it all work. Because the reality is that up to the point when he became Radiant Black, if he were to do that, it would just be like, Elizabeth was a girl who was down on her luck, and she owed $38,000 in credit card debt, and she was a failed writer. And then she moved back home. The end. And like, that would be it. It would be the most boring story ever, and everyone would hate it. But now that he's a superhero, the sci-fi element gets to be thrown in. He gets to tell his own story in real time, with probably a few exaggerations so that people don't connect their identities. But at that point, you pick up with the hallucinations that he's having yet again. This time, it's like this just gigantic, digital force that's kind of walking towards him to a degree. He doesn't really know what to make of it. It's speaking in a language that he cannot understand, but then it finally starts to speak in English, and it says, hello, Nathan, welcome to existence. And so at that point, you snap back to reality, and you have Nathan and Marshall who are actually working on his abilities, right? His powers, on what it is that he's capable of. Because from Marshall's perspective, what it looks like is the suit just responds to his mental commands. So if everything responds to his mental commands, can he do anything? Or are there limits to the things that he can and cannot do? So it's like, let's just give it a shot and let's find out. Think about firing energy blasts. And like, he fires a little mini energy blast, right? I mean, it's adorable. It's cute for what it is, right? Enough to maybe knock the wind out of somebody. But at that point, Marshall's like, I mean, let's see what you can do, man. I mean, let's see what you're really capable of. And Nathan doesn't really know how to like channel, right, the full might of his energy. He doesn't know how to use it in an effective way. And so that's where Marshall's like, okay, so when it came to the train, you responded instinctively, right? That sure, you thought of it, but your emotions were also running exceedingly high. So, I mean, let's get your emotions really, really high, right? Let's just piss you off to no end, and let's just see what happens. So he literally tells him, like, your prose sucks, right? The Oxford comma's overrated. Chandler wishes you'd never read him. And then he's just like, Justine would still be around if you knew how to conjugate. And at that point, Nathan freaks and like fires off this massive blast that like blows the little action figures to pieces. And Marshall's just like, that was dope. He's like, that's amazing. Let's go get some beers and let's just go hang out for a little while. And so again, that's when you jump back to this kind of digital conversation that he was having. And he's told by this giant, kind of machine type thing where he says, digital brain, organic brain, integration, language centers sync, incomplete, in progress. Relationship, partnership, sync, incomplete, in progress. Basically, the powers that Nathan has are still syncing with him, meaning that they're not quite a whole entity yet. But there is a kind of caveat here, right? Where it tells him communication is fundamental to any good relationship. Our connection is final. permanent. For the duration of your life, you are part of existence. But war is near. For the radiant, he will kill you and your entire planet. To die is to lose everything. Will you do all that is required to save your species? Will you take his life? And so again, that's when you pick back up with Nathan and Marshall after basically running some errands. And they're met by Radiant Red, who's just like, hello, Nathan, what a nice hometown you have. Let's talk. And grabs him and just like throws him. Right now, of course, at that moment, he activates his powers, changes into Radiant Black. And then Marshall kind of talks a little bit of trash. And then like Radiant Red just like takes his phone, destroys it. And it's just like, get out of here, or I will literally rip the skin off your body. And I will watch as like your muscles and your organs just spill out in front of the world. Now, of course, Radiant shows up, ends up, hitting Radiant Red, knocking them out of the way. And it's just like, get inside, right? Like find some place to chill. And so the fight that takes place between the two of them is pretty knockdown drag out, right? Where like Red literally says, like I was saying, such a nice hometown. I hope they have insurance. I know who you are, Nathan. I know where you live. Believe me when I tell you, I can get to you at any time and I can get to them. If I ever see your face again, all of this, it'll be the least damage that I do to you. I will hurt you, Nathan, publicly, privately, personally. And at that point, his emotions running high, fires this massive blast of energy at Radiant Red, far more than he previously fired before. And it actually overwhelms them, right? But again, he kind of has this momentary glimpse where in having the conversation with that digital entity, he almost kind of thinks this is the enemy that he's supposed to be facing off against, the one that will lead to the destruction of him and his world, which kind of makes sense. Right? I mean, it's the first, I don't know if you would really call them like a villain of Radiant that he's encountered before, but from his perspective, it is, right? Some measure of an arch nemesis, even if the whole roles aren't fully fleshed out yet. But the two of them end up firing their blast towards one another, and when they do, it destabilizes the building. And so instead of playing the villain role where Red just like takes off, right, just flies away and leaves Radiant Black to deal with everything here, they actually try to hold the building up while the various occupants escape. But the entire building comes crashing down on Nathan. And when Marshall comes running in, trying to grab him, it actually turns out that Nathan is dead. This dude died. And so that's when you pick back up with that digital conversation where it says, to die is to lose everything. Will you do all that is required to save your species? Will you take his life? And Nathan, in this conversation, had kind of given this really sad, dejected look, almost as if to say no. And the response is, then you and your world will die. And so at that moment, when Marshall is literally leaning over Nathan, the black hole, the source of his power, leaves Nathan and merges with Marshall. And it says, your friend is gone, deceased. Our connection is final, permanent, for the duration of your life. You are part of existence, but war is near. For the radiant, he will kill you and your entire planet. To die is to lose everything. Will you do all that is required to save your species? Will you take his life? The response of Marshall, unlike Nathan, yes, and he seizes that power and becomes the new Radiant Black. Now, here's the cool thing about this, right? In that moment, while Marshall is sitting here watching the paramedics work on his friend, he's just like, he's not dead, and immediately runs up and is like, there's no way he's dead. And he just starts like beating on his chest, right? And it's like, he's my best friend, and I swear if you do this, I will go to church. I will get it together. God, do something, save my friend's life. And then Nathan starts coughing. Like, so Nathan's not actually dead, which was kind of nuts. When I was reading this, I was like, did they really kill off what we thought was the main star in like the first 4 or 5 issues? What a twist. It's absolutely bonkers. But again, because of the fact that he is breathing, it doesn't mean that everything's okay, because he's told by the paramedics, yes, he has a shallow pulse, but we got here 6 minutes after the building fell and his heart was already stopped. For 6 minutes, his brain was not receiving oxygen. So we have no idea what condition he is in. And at that moment, Marshall is incensed, because while Nathan is technically alive, it's entirely possible he spends the rest of his life in a vegetative state. And from Marshall's perspective, it's all the fault of Radiant Red. And so initially, Marshall just kind of like flies out into the middle of nowhere and just kind of screams out into the ether, I don't want this power, right? I do not want it. Take it back. Give it back to Nathan. But at the end of the day, it doesn't happen. And so that's where seemingly Marshall is a lot more receptive to this, digital individual than Nathan was. Because again, the conversation kicks back in and the name Radiant is repeated yet again. And Marshall asks the question, why do you keep saying Radiant? And the response, our sync is progressing faster than Nathan Burnett. Good, you are ready. And he's like, you're absolutely right that I'm ready. And that's where he's told, existence, all that you are and are connected to, time, space, matter itself. But war is near. For the Radiant, he will kill you and your entire planet. So again, kind of a repeat statement. We will prepare. It is my duty. He will try to shatter our connection, but our connection is final, permanent. For the duration of your life, you are part of existence. And so that's where Marshall's like, so he has to kill me in order to sever the connection. And the response, and your entire species. And the question of Marshall, what's his name? What's the name of this person that's hunting me down? And he doesn't give an answer. And so that's where Marshall says, okay, so like what now? As cool as I'm sure all this cosmic stuff is, I gotta be honest, I really don't care about any of that right now. What I care about is finding the person that put my best friend in a coma. You help me find them, you use whatever cosmic connections you have across time and space and matter itself to get me a location, and then I'll do whatever it is that you want. Do we have a deal? And seemingly they do, because you pick up with Red where they're just kind of freaking out. They're pissed off about what's going on, right? The whole situation got out of control and they got somebody killed. And then Marshall shows up and Marshall immediately attacks them. Now, initially Red thinks it's Nathan, but Marshall's like, no, he's in a coma and it's because of you. And Marshall immediately attacks. And the level of brutality here is intense. I wouldn't go as far as to say that Marshall's like actively killing this person, but he is fighting with a vengeance here because he's fighting out of anger over his friend, right? The potential death of his friend. And literally he says, I'm not going to do you like you did Nathan. I want you to see this coming, and just lays into them. But that's where you start to see what it is that these folks are capable of. Because in this instance, when Marshall initially gets the upper hand, what he ends up realizing here is that with Red, they can actually absorb matter in order to create an armor form, different things like that. So seemingly all these different variants have different sets of powers, right? And those different sets of powers would likely require them to work in unison in order to overcome any particular threat that may exist out there. But in this particular instance, Red actually starts to siphon off the power of Radiant Black. Now, of course, this leads to Marshall, hitting them and sending them crashing down into the water. He spawns a cape for himself, which is kind of cool, right? He's like, I just put on my cape. That's dope. But that leads to Red emerging in this giant like armor form and then absolutely starts hammering onto Marshall, like putting the fear of God in this guy. But again, in that moment, because he's kind of seeing what seemed to happen with Nathan in his own head, kind of happening to him, he immediately blasts Red and just says, you dropped a building on my best friend. You took the one good thing in my life. He was a good person, way better than me, which sucks for you because this is all I have. And I'm not stopping until you're dead. And the response of Red, who's actually a woman, says, I just wanted to scare him and I didn't mean to hurt him. But in the middle of this fight, a pink glow appears and they just say, hey, sorry, really seriously, don't ever show up anywhere uninvited, but you're in legit danger. It's not just a pink version of Radiant, it's also a yellow one. And Marshall's literally like, how many more of these things are there? And they're like, we don't know, to be honest with you. But this girl's just like, you sound like 1,000 years old, but look, it doesn't really matter. He's here. He's going to kill us. I've kept one step ahead, barely. We saw you on the news. This is bigger than whatever you two are fighting about. And that's where the guy says he can counteract everything that we can do. And the response of Marshall, you don't know what I can do. And this guy says, then you better hope you've leveled up fast, son, because I hit him with everything I have across the spectrum and he barely shrugged. But in the midst of that, they're all attacked. And seemingly the main foe of this whole story shows up and says, it hurts, I know, a consequence of playing with fire. You have something that is not yours. You will all lose change your lives. Unfortunate, but necessary. You have no choice but one. Will your planet die as well? And I gotta say, man, this enemy looks dope. With that being said, guys, we're gonna bring this video to an end. Let me know what you guys think about Radiant. Do you guys want me to cover the rest of the series? Maybe we'll do it like Sundays or Saturdays or something like that. Let me know down in the comment section. Thank you all for watching, and I will catch you all later. Peace.